The morning of November 3rd, 1944. Eastern France, near the village of Rodalbe. Oberfeldwebel Karl Brommen crouched in the commander's cupola of his Tiger I tank, turret number 312, scanning the tree line 800 meters ahead. The visibility was perfect. Clear autumn air, no fog, no smoke, the kind of morning where a Tiger commander could see everything that mattered. His 88mm KWK-36 gun was loaded with Panzergranate 39, armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition, 7.3 kilograms of tungsten-cored death that could punch through 132mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Brommen had fired this gun in anger 23 times since July, 23 shots, 19 confirmed kills, 3 American Shermans, 11 34s, 5 assorted targets. The mathematics of survival favored him completely. The Tiger's frontal armor was 100mm thick, sloped at 12 degrees. The side armor was 80mm vertical. No American 75mm gun could touch him from the front at any range. The Sherman's upgraded 76mm gun might penetrate his driver's plate at 600 meters if conditions were perfect, which they never were. The Soviet 85mm gun on the 34-85 was dangerous at close range, but Brommen never let them get close. He commanded the 88, the gun that had become legend, the gun that Rommel had used to massacre British armor at Halfaya Pass in 1941, where 13 buried 88mm flak guns destroyed 100 tanks in a single engagement. The gun that could kill at 2,000 meters when Allied tankers were still trying to identify targets at 800 meters. The gun that had made the word 88 a curse in English, Russian, and French. At 09:15 hours, something hit turret 312 from the front. Brommen never saw the muzzle flash, never heard the report over the noise of his own Maybach HL 230 engine. The shell arrived traveling at over 900 meters per second, just under 2,000 miles per hour. At that velocity, sound lagged far behind the projectile. The round hit the Tiger's gun mantlet at a shallow angle, deflected slightly upward, and penetrated the turret roof, where the armor was only 25mm thick. The interior of the Tiger became an oven. The shell's explosive filler detonated inside the fighting compartment. 64 grams of amatol generated temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. Gunner Heinz Ostermeyer died instantly when the blast wave crushed his chest against the gun's breech mechanism. Loader Franz Dietrich was flash-burned beyond recognition. Driver Wilhelm Krebs, sealed in the bow compartment, felt the Tiger lurch and then begin to burn. He opened his hatch and ran. Radio operator Peter Schilling followed him. Brommen had a moment, perhaps 3 seconds, between the hit and the secondary detonation of the Tiger's own ammunition. In that moment, what consumed his mind was not pain or fear, but a single question that made no sense. What gun fires an 88mm shell that fast? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Because Karl Brommen knew every Allied tank gun by its sound, by its muzzle velocity, by its penetration characteristics. He had studied intelligence reports. He had examined knocked-out enemy vehicles. The American 75mm made a distinctive crack. The Soviet 85mm had a deeper boom. The British 17-pounder, which he'd never personally encountered, was supposed to sound like thunder at close range. But this had been something else. A shell moving at the velocity of a German 88mm gun, penetrating armor like a German 88mm shell, but fired from a position he never saw, from a gun he never identified. He tried to lift himself from the cupola. The Tiger's interior was already filling with smoke. He managed to get halfway out before the ammunition cooked off. 47 rounds of 88mm ammunition, each containing between 4 and 6 kilograms of propellant, detonated in rapid sequence. The explosion blew the Tiger's turret completely off its ring. 60 tons of German engineering excellence became a funeral pyre. American tankers from the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion found the wreck 3 hours later, after their infantry had secured the village. Staff Sergeant Robert Early walked around the smoking hull with professional interest. He'd been the gunner who made the shot. 1,200 yards, just under 1,100 meters. Moving target. First round hit. The 90mm M3 gun on his M36 tank destroyer had performed exactly as designed. Early examined the penetration. Clean hole through the mantlet, deflection into the turret roof. Textbook gunnery. He'd trained on the M36 for only 6 weeks before the battalion shipped to France in October. Before that, he'd been on M10 tank destroyers with 3-inch guns that couldn't reliably kill Panthers beyond 500 yards. The 90mm changed everything. Now he could engage German heavy armour at the same ranges the Germans had been killing Shermans since Normandy. What Early didn't mention to anyone, because it seemed like useless information, was that the 90mm M3 gun was specifically developed to match the performance of the German 88mm flak gun. Same muzzle velocity, approximately 930 meters per second with armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition. Similar penetration characteristics. The American round was slightly heavier, 10.4 kilograms versus 7.3 kilograms, and the caliber was 2 millimeters larger, but the ballistics were nearly identical. The Americans had designed their tank destroyer around the German gun's performance envelope. They'd looked at what the 88 could do and said, "We need that, but mobile, in large numbers, and available to every theatre." The result was the M36, 56 tons versus the Tiger's 56.5 tons, but with an open-topped turret that saved weight, and a Ford GAA Vate engine that was more reliable than the Tiger's temperamental Maybach. 600 M36S would be built by the end of 1944. Germany had produced approximately 500 Tigers total since 1942. Karl Bromman died believing his Tiger had been hit by some secret Allied weapon. He never knew he'd been killed by a gun whose performance deliberately mimicked the weapon he'd trusted to keep him alive. The irony would have been instructive, but Bromman was no longer available for instruction. The morning he died was not unusual. By late 1944, Tiger tank crews across every front were experiencing the same phenomenon. Sudden destruction from ranges where they expected immunity, penetrations from angles that shouldn't have been possible, kills from guns they never identified before the hit arrived. The Tigers were dying, and increasingly, their crews had no idea what was killing them. To understand how this happened requires going back to where the 88mm gun became legend. North Africa, 1941. Halfaya Pass on the Libya-Egypt border, June 15th. Operation Battleaxe. British 8th Army attempting to relieve Tobruk. German and Italian forces, massively outnumbered, waiting in defensive positions. Among the German defenders, Luftwaffe Flak Regiment 33, 1st Battalion. 12 88mm, Flak 36 anti-aircraft guns, dug into hull-down positions with only their barrels and gun shields visible above ground. Level. The British had 190 tanks, including heavily armoured Matilda IIs with 78mm of frontal armour, considered nearly invulnerable to most anti-tank weapons of 1941. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the 12 88mm guns of Flak Regiment 33 had destroyed 100 British tanks. 100. That's 8.3 tanks destroyed per gun. The British tankers reported being hit by weapons they couldn't see at ranges they couldn't believe. Matildas exploding at 1,500 metres. Cruiser tanks burning at 2,000 metres. The British had never encountered anything like it. The 88mm flak gun was never designed to fight tanks. It was designed in 1928 by Krupp engineers working in Sweden because the Versailles Treaty prohibited Germany from developing new weapons. The specification called for an anti-aircraft gun capable of engaging bombers at high altitude. The 88mm caliber was chosen because Imperial German Navy guns of that bore had proven effective in World War I, and manufacturing equipment already existed. The gun that emerged was a masterpiece of practical engineering. The 8.8 cm Flak 18 entered service in 1933. It had a semi-automatic breech that ejected spent cases automatically and remained open for the next round. Rate of fire, 15 to 20 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity, 810 to 840 meters per second, depending on ammunition type. Effective ceiling for anti-aircraft work, 8,000 meters, over 26,000 feet. The gun was mounted on a cruciform platform that could be set up in 2.5 minutes. The platform provided 360-degree traverse and 85-degree elevation. The gun could fire while still on its wheeled carriage, or it could be fully emplaced for sustained operations. Weight, 7 tons. Crew, 10 men, though 6 could operate it in emergencies. 3 types of ammunition: high explosive shells with time fuses for aircraft, high explosive shells with percussion fuses for ground targets, and armor-piercing shells with tracer and small bursting charges for tanks. The armor-piercing round was initially an afterthought. Anti-aircraft guns weren't supposed to fight tanks. That was the job of dedicated anti-tank guns like the 37mm Pak-36, which German infantry divisions carried in abundance. Then came Spain. 1936. The Spanish Civil War. Germany sent the Condor Legion to support Francisco Franco's nationalist forces. Among the equipment, a small number of 88mm Flak 18 guns, intended purely for air defense against Republican aircraft. The problem was that the Soviet Union had provided the Republicans with 26 infantry tanks and BT series cavalry tanks. Spanish nationalist forces had almost no weapons capable of stopping them. Someone, and history doesn't record exactly who, had the idea to try using the 88mm flak guns in direct fire against the tanks. The results were so effective that German army observers immediately began studying how to institutionalize the tactic. By 1937, General Ludwig Ritter von Eimensberger was publishing articles explaining how heavy anti-aircraft guns could be employed in the anti-tank role. Training manuals followed. By the time World War II began, German doctrine explicitly included using flak guns against ground targets. The 88's effectiveness came from factors that had nothing to do with advanced technology. It fired a large shell, 9.4 kilograms for high explosive rounds, 7.3 kilograms for armor-piercing rounds. Large shells carried more explosive, generated more kinetic energy, and did more damage. The gun's high muzzle velocity produced a flat trajectory, meaning gunners could hit targets accurately without making complex elevation corrections. The flat trajectory also meant the shell retained energy better at long range. Most importantly, the 88 could engage tanks at ranges where dedicated anti-tank guns couldn't touch them. The standard German anti-tank gun in 1941 was the 50mm Pak-38, effective range perhaps 800 meters against medium armor. The 88 could kill at twice that distance. Range equals safety. If you can kill the enemy before he can kill you, you win. British tankers at Halfaya Pass learned this in the most brutal way possible. They advanced across open ground toward dug-in positions they couldn't identify. The first indication of danger was when their lead tanks exploded. Flames, black smoke, turrets blown off by ammunition detonations. The British did what armor doctrine demanded. They advanced faster, trying to close the range where their own guns would be effective. The 88s killed them methodically. Gun. Crews working with choreographed efficiency. Gunner acquiring target. Commander calling range. Loader ramming shell. Gunner firing. Breech automatically ejecting spent case. Loader already moving with the next round. 15 to 20 rounds per minute sustained. Every 4th or 5th round, a hit. Every hit, a kill. 1 Matilda II, weighing 26 tons with 78mm of frontal armor, took 5 direct hits before stopping. The crew bailed out and reported that the shells were simply too powerful. The armor held for the first 3 impacts, cracking but not penetrating. The 4th shell went through. The 5th set the interior ablaze. The psychological impact was devastating. British tankers believed their Matildas were virtually immune to anti-tank weapons. The 88 punctured that belief along with the armor. After Halfaya Pass, the 88 became infamous. British soldiers called it anti-aircraft, anti-tank, and anti-social. The phrase spread. American troops adopted flak, pack, and not nice. The weapon appeared in cartoons. Bill Maudlin drew his character Willie telling an officer, "I'll let you know when we capture the inventor of the 88. The gun's reputation grew beyond its actual capabilities, which were formidable enough without embellishment. By 1942, every Allied tanker knew about the 88. Intelligence briefings emphasized it. Training warned about it. Veterans told horror stories about invisible guns that killed at impossible ranges. The weapon became mythologized, transformed from a very good anti-aircraft gun that worked surprisingly well against tanks into some kind of super weapon that German forces deployed everywhere in unlimited numbers. Reality was more prosaic. Germany never built enough 88s to deploy them everywhere. Total production of all variants, Flak 18, Flak 36, Flak 37, and the later Flak 41, approximately 21,300 guns, over 12 years from 1933 to 1945. That sounds like a lot until you consider that these guns were split between Luftwaffe anti-aircraft regiments, protecting German cities from bombers, Wehrmacht mixed anti-aircraft battalions, supporting ground operations, and coastal defense installations protecting ports and harbors. Most 88mm guns spent the entire war shooting at aircraft and never engaged a single tank. Of those that did engage tanks, most were concentrated in North Africa under Rommel, where open terrain favored long-range gunnery and where German forces faced chronic shortages of dedicated anti-tank weapons. On the Eastern Front and in Western Europe, 88s were valuable, but not numerous. A lucky German division might have 4 to 8 guns. More commonly, they had none. But the legend persisted, and the legend had consequences. When German engineers began designing a heavy tank in 1941, the weapon they chose for its main armament was obvious. Put an 88mm gun on a tank, make the gun mobile, give German tankers the same ability to kill at long range that flak crews had demonstrated so dramatically. The result was the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger Ausf. E. Designation SD, KFZ, 181. Production began in August 1942. The Tiger I mounted the 8.8 cm KWK 36 tank gun, a weapon derived from the Flak 36, but modified for the confined space of a tank turret. The gun shared the same caliber, fired the same ammunition types with minor primer differences, and had identical ballistics. Barrel length 56 calibers, meaning 56 times 88 mm, equals 4.9 meters, just over 16 feet. The Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate 132 mm of armor at 1,000 meters, using Panzer Granate 39 ammunition. That was sufficient to defeat any Allied tank from the front at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The Sherman's frontal armor, 50 mm on the glacis, sloped at 56 degrees for an effective thickness of approximately 90 mm. The Tiger could kill it from over 2 kilometers. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could not penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at any range. This asymmetry defined armored combat from 1943 through mid-1944. Tigers operated as mobile fire support, positioned in hull-down defensive positions or used as breakthrough elements in offensive operations. A single Tiger could dominate a battlefield, forcing Allied armor to either retreat or attempt flanking maneuvers that exposed them to other German weapons. The tactical paradigm was clear. Tigers killed from ranges where Allied tanks couldn't fight back. German tank crews understood this. They trained for it. They built tactics around it. Engage at maximum range. Use the gun's flat trajectory to acquire first-round hits. If the enemy closes, withdraw and re-engage. Never allow the enemy into the effective range of their weapons. The Tiger's weight and mechanical complexity meant it was slow, averaging 10 kilometers per hour cross-country, but speed didn't matter if you could kill everything before it got close. Karl Bromman and thousands of Tiger crews like him internalized this doctrine. The 88mm gun was their shield and sword. As long as they saw the enemy first and fired first, they would survive. The armor would protect them from anything that fired back. The mathematics were simple and absolute. What Bromman and his peers didn't know, couldn't have known until it killed them, was that by late 1944, the mathematics had changed. The Allies had studied the 88. They'd measured its performance. They'd examined knocked-out German tanks and captured flak guns. They'd interviewed survivors of engagements where Tigers had massacred Allied armor. And they'd reached a conclusion that was both obvious and difficult to implement. If the Germans can kill us at 2,000 meters with an 88mm gun, we need an 88mm gun that can kill them at 2,000 meters. The problem was straightforward. The solution was not. American ordnance officers in 1943 faced a dilemma that went beyond simple engineering. They needed a gun that could match the German 88mm performance, but they needed it mounted on a vehicle that American industry could build in quantity, that American logistics could support across oceans, and that American crews could operate without the extensive training German panzer forces required. The starting point was the existing anti-aircraft gun in American service, the 90mm M1. Developed in the late 1930s, the M1 was America's heavy anti-aircraft gun, designed to engage high-altitude bombers. The caliber choice of 90mm, 3.54 inches, came from earlier American experiments with 3-inch guns that proved slightly underpowered. Engineers added roughly a tenth of an inch and arrived at a weapon that performed admirably against aircraft. Someone at Army Ordnance noticed what should have been obvious. The 90mm M1 anti-aircraft gun had ballistics remarkably similar to the German 88mm flak gun. Both fired shells at approximately 900 meters per second. Both could engage targets at comparable ranges. Both generated similar kinetic energy at impact. The difference was that the 90mm shell was heavier, 10.4 kilograms for armor-piercing rounds versus 7.3 kilograms for the German equivalent. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Take the 90mm anti-aircraft gun, modify it for tank fighting, mount it on a mobile platform, deploy it in numbers large enough to ensure every American armored division could engage German heavy tanks on equal terms. The result would be a weapon system that could do to Tigers what Tigers had been doing to Shermans. Development began in earnest in 1943. The weapon that emerged was designated the 90mm M3 tank gun. It was not simply a 90mm M1 mounted horizontally. The barrel was shortened from 50 calibers length to 53 calibers, which seems counterintuitive until you understand that the longer barrel actually improved muzzle velocity slightly while still fitting in a tank turret. The recoil mechanism was redesigned to function in the confined space of an armoured vehicle. The breech was modified for easier operation by a seated gunner. The ammunition required careful development. The T-30E16 armour-piercing round, standardized as M82, weighed 10.4 kilograms and contained a penetrator made of homogeneous steel hardened to defeat armour plate. When fired from the M3 gun, this round achieved a muzzle velocity of 933 meters per second, nearly identical to the German 88mm Panzergranate 39. At 1,000 meters, the M82 round could penetrate 137 millimeters of armor plate at 0 degrees obliquity. Those numbers meant everything. A 90mm M82 round could penetrate a Tiger I's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. It could defeat a Panther's frontal glacis at 800 meters. It could destroy any German tank from the side or rear at any combat range. The asymmetry that had defined armored warfare since 1943 was about to disappear. The platform for this gun was the M36 tank destroyer, officially designated the M36 gun motor carriage. American doctrine separated tanks from tank destroyers. Tanks supported infantry and exploited breakthroughs. Tank destroyers hunted enemy armor. This division seemed artificial to many commanders, but it reflected American industrial logic: build specialized vehicles for specialized purposes rather than one overweight, expensive machine trying to do everything. The M36 used the chassis of the M10, A1 tank destroyer, which itself was built on a modified Sherman hull. The critical modification was the turret. The M36's turret was larger than the M10's, designed specifically to accommodate the 90mm gun's recoil and the ammunition it required. The turret was open-topped, meaning it had no roof, which saved weight and improved crew visibility, but left the crew vulnerable to artillery airbursts and grenades. The vehicle weighed 28.1 tons combat loaded, exactly half the weight of a Tiger I. The armor was thin by comparison, maximum of 50mm on the frontal glacis, sloped at 55 degrees, and just 19mm on the turret face. But the M36 wasn't designed to trade shots with Tigers at close range. It was designed to kill them from ambush, from defilade positions, from ranges where the Tiger's own doctrine said Tigers should be doing the killing. Maximum speed was 42 km per hour on roads, considerably faster than the Tiger's 38 km per hour theoretical maximum. The Ford GAA Vate engine produced 450 horsepower and was legendarily reliable compared to the Tiger's Maybach engine, which required constant maintenance and consumed enormous quantities of fuel the German logistical system couldn't consistently provide. Production began in June 1944. By December, 577 M36 tank destroyers had been built. By the end of the war, 1,413 would roll off American assembly lines. This was mass production on a scale Germany couldn't match. Total Tiger I production from 1942 to August 1944, 1,347 vehicles. The Americans were building M36s faster than Germany had ever built Tigers. The first M36s reached Europe in October 1944, assigned to tank destroyer battalions supporting 1st and 3rd Armies in France. The crews received minimal training on the new vehicle. Most had been operating M10 tank destroyers with 3-inch guns, or M18 Hellcats with 76mm guns. They knew the doctrine: find hull-down positions, wait for German armor to appear, fire from ambush, displace before return fire arrived. What they didn't fully appreciate yet was that the 90mm gun changed the engagement calculus completely. With 3-inch guns, they'd been forced to let German tanks close to 600 meters or less before they could reliably penetrate. At those ranges, German tankers could often identify and engage the tank destroyers before catastrophic damage occurred. The 90mm extended effective range to 1,200 meters and beyond. At those ranges, German tank crews had no warning. Staff Sergeant Robert Early's kill of Karl Bromann's Tiger on November 3rd, 1944, was not exceptional. It was typical. The engagement distance of 1,100 meters was exactly what American tank destroyer doctrine called for against heavy German armor. The first round hit was good gunnery, but not miraculous. The M3 gun's flat trajectory made range estimation less critical than with lower velocity weapons. The penetration through the mantlet and into the turret roof was a result of careful ammunition development and simple physics. From Bromann's perspective, inside the Tiger, the engagement made no sense. He'd been scanning for threats at ranges where threats were supposed to appear. 800 meters, 700 meters, the distances where American 75mm and 76mm guns became dangerous. His doctrine, his training, his experience all said that if he maintained vigilance at those ranges, he would see the enemy before they could hurt him. The shell that killed him came from beyond his defensive perimeter, travelling at a velocity his mind associated only with German weapons. In the 3 seconds between impact and death, Bromann's tactical understanding collapsed. What he knew about Allied capabilities said this shouldn't be possible. What was happening said otherwise. The contradiction was never resolved, because he was never given time to resolve it. This same scene repeated across France, Belgium, and Germany in the winter of 1944 and spring of 1945. Tiger crews, positioned in what they believed were safe overwatch positions, died without understanding what had killed them. The reports that made it back to German intelligence were confused and contradictory. Some crews reported being engaged by heavy anti-tank guns they assumed were towed 88mm flak guns captured from German stocks. Others reported unknown American weapons with capabilities exceeding anything in intelligence files. The confusion was understandable. The 90mm M3 guns ballistics were so similar to the 88mm KWK-36 that even experienced German tankers couldn't distinguish them by sound or by the effects they observed. Both guns produced similar muzzle blast reports, both created similar entry wounds in armor, both generated similar secondary effects when ammunition cooked off. Without examining the actual projectile, which was difficult when it had just killed you, there was no way to know you'd been hit by an American 90mm rather than a German 88. Some Tigers were killed by British 17-pounder guns, which fired a smaller 76.2mm shell at even higher velocity. The 17-pounder could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at 1,000 meters, using special APDS ammunition, armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds with tungsten cores. British tank crews and anti-tank units knocked out numerous Tigers in northwestern Europe, often from ranges that shocked German survivors. But the 17-pounder was different enough in its effects that German crews sometimes recognized it. The entry hole was smaller. The sound was distinctly different, a sharp crack rather than the deeper boom of an 88. The APDS rounds often overpenetrated, passing completely through the Tiger without detonating internal ammunition, which gave crews time to bail out. The 90mm offered no such recognition. Its effects mimicked the 88 so precisely that German tank crews died believing they'd been hit by their own weapon. This created a profound psychological effect that German intelligence officers noted in after-action reports. Crews reported being terrified not just of American tank destroyers, which was rational, but of the possibility that American forces had somehow acquired or copied the 88mm gun in quantity. The fear was misplaced but comprehensible. The 88 had been Germany's technical advantage, the weapon that made Tigers and Panthers dominant. If the Americans now had equivalent weapons in unlimited numbers, what advantage remained? The answer, increasingly by early 1945, was none. The Eastern Front, where Soviet mathematics changed the equation. While American 90mm guns were killing Tigers in France, Soviet tank designers had arrived at similar conclusions through different paths. The Soviets had been facing 88mm guns since 1941, when German flak batteries had devastated Soviet tank columns during Operation Barbarossa. Soviet armor doctrine in 1941 emphasized mass over individual quality. 34 medium tanks were excellent for their time, but they carried only a 76.2mm gun that struggled against German heavy armor. The problem became critical in July 1943 at Kursk, where Tigers and Panthers massacred Soviet tank formations at ranges where Soviet guns couldn't respond effectively. The Soviets responded with characteristic directness: build a bigger gun and put it on everything. The result was the 85mm D5 tons tank gun, developed specifically to match German anti-tank capabilities. The 85mm D5 tons was a compromise between power and practicality. Its .52 caliber barrel length produced a muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second with armor-piercing rounds, slower than the German 88, but sufficient for penetration at combat ranges. More importantly, the gun could be mounted in the 34's turret with minimal modifications, allowing rapid deployment across the massive Soviet tank fleet. The 34-85 entered service in March 1944. Production ramped up with Soviet industrial efficiency. By the end of 1944, over 10,000 to 34-85s had been built. This was force multiplication on a scale that dwarfed anything Germany could achieve. For every Tiger Germany produced, the Soviets were building dozens of 34-85s. The 85mm gun could penetrate a Tiger's side armor at 1,000 meters and frontal armor at ranges under 500 meters with optimal shot placement. More importantly, it could engage Panthers and late-model German medium tanks on roughly equal terms. Soviet doctrine emphasized maneuver and numerical superiority rather than long-range gunnery, so 500 meters was an acceptable engagement range if you had 5 tanks for every one the enemy fielded. Tiger crews on the Eastern Front faced a different kind of mathematics than their counterparts in the West. American tank destroyers were lethal but relatively uncommon, encountered in specific sectors where Allied armored divisions operated. Soviet armor was everywhere, and by late 1944, most of it carried guns that could hurt Tigers if they got close enough. The solution was the same: never let them get close. But Soviet tactics increasingly involved overwhelming local Tiger positions with coordinated attacks from multiple directions, accepting casualties to get enough tanks into effective range. Hauptmann Friedrich Langanke commanded Tiger No. 231 in Army Group Center during the Soviet summer offensive of 1944, Operation Bagration. His Tiger was dug into a defensive position outside Vitebsk, with excellent fields of fire covering a road intersection Soviet armor would have to cross. The position was tactically sound. He could engage enemy armor at over 1,500 meters. His ammunition load was 42 rounds. Basic calculation: he could kill 42 Soviet tanks before running dry, and he'd rarely missed. On June 23, 1944, at 0430 hours, Soviet artillery opened fire on German positions with an intensity Langanke had never experienced. The bombardment lasted 2 hours. When it lifted, Soviet armor appeared from multiple directions simultaneously. Langanke's Tiger began engaging targets at maximum range. First kill at 1,400 meters, second at 1,300, third at 1,200. The kills were clean, textbook gunnery. More tanks appeared, 34 85s advancing through smoke and dust. Langanke's gunner stayed calm, acquiring targets, firing, moving to the next target. Kill 4, kill 5, kill 6. The Tiger's 88mm gun performed flawlessly, but the Soviet tanks kept coming. At 0715 hours, something hit Tiger 231 from the right side at an angle Langanke hadn't been watching. The shell penetrated the 80mm side armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. Langanke survived long enough to identify the source, a 34-85 at approximately 700 meters, partially concealed in a tree line he'd been too busy to monitor while engaging targets to his front. The Tiger had killed 6 enemy tanks. The Soviets had accepted those losses to get 1 tank into a flanking position with a gun capable of making a kill shot. The mathematics worked in Soviet favor because they had enough tanks to make the mathematics work. Langanke's Tiger was combat effective until the moment it wasn't. His faith in the 88mm gun was justified until it became irrelevant. By late 1944, Tiger crews across all fronts were learning the same lesson Karl Brauman never lived long enough to understand. The weapon that had made them invulnerable had been systematically matched by Allied development programs. The 88mm gun was still formidable, but it was no longer unique. The Allies had built weapons with equivalent or superior performance and deployed them in quantities Germany couldn't match. The Tigers were dying, and increasingly, their crews understood they were being killed by the same kind of long-range, precision fire they'd once inflicted on their enemies. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.